I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring you guests that teach all of us about our law. Some of them teach us how it's made, how it's fixed, what's wrong with it, what we can do about it. Others enforce the law, defend people who are accused of breaking the law. The law is all around us. It's supposed to be a kind of a recipe for us getting along together, avoiding some differences, and solving differences once we have to face them. Each week, our experts tell us a little bit about some problems that perhaps we're not ordinarily aware of. We know that we're facing a difficult economy right now. Most businesses are shrinking. The business we're going to talk about today isn't shrinking at all. It seems to be growing, and interestingly, you and I are paying for it. It's the prison business here in the state of Wisconsin. Very expensive, not very well understood, and causing a lot of concern right now, not just for the people who are in the prisons. So let's hear from somebody who is an expert, happens to be the head guy. He runs the prison. He's a cabinet member in Governor Doyle's cabinet, and he's in charge of all of our prisons in the state of Wisconsin. Let's meet Rick. Rick, you're the head of the whole business, aren't you?
I am. I'm Secretary of the Department of Corrections.
And that's Rick Raemisch, right?
Correct.
You came up an interesting trail, and I think the people should hear about it. Many of us have the idea that if you get to be an appointee from this governor or any other governor, you contributed a lot of money at fundraisers and knew somebody. But boy, your trail shows a lot of achievement and many steps in getting to the position you have right now. How did it all begin?
Well, first let me say, with Governor Doyle, of course, he was one of the longest-standing attorney generals in the state of Wisconsin, if not the longest, and a former district attorney. Where I first met him, my background, I started as a Dane County deputy sheriff. I did that for 11 and a half years. That's the county that surrounds Madison, of course. And the last 7 and a half of those years, I was an undercover narcotics detective who would also work homicides when they occurred. From there, while working, also attended the University of Wisconsin Law School, and I graduated on a Sunday and started in the Dane County District Attorney's Office as an assistant district attorney on the following Monday. Worked there for a period of time, then was recruited by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District to be a federal drug prosecutor. I did that and then was appointed sheriff of Dane County and ran successfully for 4 terms. Went into the private sector for a while, and when the governor was elected governor, I started in his administration as a administrator in the Department of Corrections, administrator of probation and parole. From there, I became deputy secretary, and then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, the governor appointed me secretary, and that's how I got to where I'm sitting today.
Now, is that always a cabinet position appointed by the governor?
The secretary position, yes.
All right. So if we get a different governor 2 years from now, 4 years from now, then you're out and somebody else is in theory?
I'm hoping he'll also be one of the longest-standing governors in the state of Wisconsin. I think that's up to him, but I work directly for him, and if someone new came into office, I'm assuming I would move on, yes.
Well, I happen to be a friend and a backer of the governor as well. And you tell him that contribution I said I was going to make last summer, it's still on my mind.
I'll let him know.
All right. Well, this prison business, it's a big business in Wisconsin, isn't it? How big?
Well, my budget is over $1 billion, and there are 23,000 inmates incarcerated now in the state of Wisconsin in state prisons, and we oversee over 70,000 individuals on probation and parole, and we have about 1,000 juveniles in our system. Plus, we have the sex offender registry with about 20,000 sex offenders on it.
So how many prisons do we have?
We have 20 prisons and 16 work release centers, where it's a big operation, obviously.
And we've got one of the larger ones right here in Oshkosh.
That's correct.
In fact, Judy Smith, the warden, is very active in this community, helping us in this town understand what she's trying to do out there and the limitations on it, and having some of the prisoners gain some benefits from education and work here in the community. They are kind of a city within the city, aren't they?
Well, they're a city with, one could say, the worst population. Warden Smith does a great job for us, and we're real glad to have her and lucky to have her.
Now, you told me before we got started, and we were just chatting, that we have twice as many prisoners as they do in the state of Minnesota?
Minnesota has about 9,000 inmates, and we have 23,000, which means either we have a really bad group of citizens in the state or we're doing something differently. And obviously we have great citizens in the state of Wisconsin, and it's time we take a real hard look at the way we're sentencing individuals into our system.
Well, that isn't a decision that you make. That's a legislative decision, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm often wrong. That goes back to when Tommy Thompson, who was also a friend of mine, was governor, and people were pounding the table that our prisoners were getting out too soon and it was dangerous for the community, and they passed some law about some sentencing that didn't give flexibility to the prison system, or for that matter to anyone else. Once there was a sentence, it had to be served.
That's true. I think in everybody's rush to be tough on crime, we should have taken a step back and thought, let's be smart on crime instead. And part of the governor's budget now is looking at some sentencing reforms, and I think the perfect storm has formed. We're one of 4 states, for instance, that do not have some type of good time incentive for inmates to behave themselves in the system. We're one of 40 states looking at sentencing reform right now, and we just had a 10-year plan that was produced by an independent contractor that said that if we continue to do business exactly the same way we're doing it today, that within 10 years we're going to need to house another 5,000 inmates to the tune of, just in bricks and mortar, another $1.2 billion. It will double my budget. And that's a roadmap of where we don't want to be in 10 years.
Well, we're broke. I'm not going to blame it all on you. In fact, you don't have much discretion. Once the judge sends you a prisoner, there's a recipe for how long you get to keep that prisoner, and there's not much you can do about it.
No, that's correct. Right now, of course, with truth in sentencing, if they're sentenced to 5 years, for the most part, they do 5 years. And the unfortunate thing is when truth in sentencing was passed, what was supposed to be passed with that is what's called sentencing guidelines that would have given parameters for the length of time a person could be incarcerated, and that was never done. So now, of course, 5 years means 5 years under the old system. 5 years could mean 1.5 or 2 years and have some incentives for the inmates. We're not talking about going back to the old system. I think there are a lot of flaws, but under the governor's proposed budget, what inmates have is some incentive to behave themselves, and they're given good time credit for that, and they have to earn the right to be reviewed for release. And of course we aren't talking the violent offenders or sex offenders, just those that earn the right to have their sentence reviewed and can get you know, maybe 15% of that sentence or 25% taken off the incarceration time and added to the supervision time.
Well, it sounds like it would make a much safer, better run prison if people have an incentive when they're in prison to behave.
You know, every time I'm in one of my institutions talking to correctional officers, they all have the same message, and that message is that there's no incentive now for the inmates to improve themselves, and it causes us to work under a more dangerous situation. For the correctional officers are in full support of this.
We have to take a break, Secretary. We'll be back in just a moment.